And so what the United States has basically done is backed off from the call for an immediate departure of President Mubarak and said, essentially, we will endorse any process that leads to an orderly transition. But at this point, we don't seem to have one in our back pocket.
Indeed, and it doesn't seem like the U.S. is about to provide one. But should it be?
Well, no, I don't think it can. I mean, essentially, this is something for the regime and for the opposition and for mediators within Egypt to do. What the United States is doing is kind of giving a very clear message. As long as it's an orderly process, we will accommodate ourselves to it. And in a sense, the United States now is lining up some international actors, especially in Europe, behind that kind of position.
Do you think behind the scenes the US is pushing for one man to lead over others? I'm thinking, of the foremost candidates. We've got Suleiman, Amr Musa, Mohammed El-Baradei. Are any of those preferable to the US?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are some who might be more preferable than others. Amr Musa is regarded in the United States, I think, as sort of a prickly and difficult, but still a sort of a man of the current establishment. Omar Suleiman is a man who's well known here. But I think, again, I'm an academic and not a policymaker, but my sense very much is that those in policymaking circles do get that this was a diseased political system, and reaching out to a specific individual is probably not the best way out of Egypt's political crisis.
And we're getting these reports, of course, of the Muslim Brotherhood perhaps starting talks tomorrow with Vice President Omar Suleiman. From your knowledge of Egypt, how significant is that?
Well, it's significant, I think, for both sides. I mean, the government has treated the Muslim Brotherhood, calls it a terrorist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood has actually wished to engage the regime for a long time, but when it finally swung behind these demonstrations, and it took a few days for it to do so, it basically took the common line of the other groups. It says, Mubarak has to go first, then we'll talk. If the Muslim Brotherhood actually does show up and talk with Omar Suleiman, they may be breaking ranks with the rest of the opposition. They're an awful lot less radical group than they have the reputation for being outside of the country.
And indeed breaking ranks with the protesters who are still demanding that Mubarak step down before any next move be taken. But is this the next move that has to be taken to break the impasse?
Well, there certainly has to be something done to break the impasse. I think the main thing that we need to know from the current Egyptian regime is it really serious about transition, or is it simply trying to drag this out so long, split the opposition, and essentially gradually convince the demonstrators that they've got better things to do with their time? My guess is that they're still betting on the second strategy.
Nathan Brown, thanks very much for joining us from Washington, D.C. Still much more to come on the programme, including accident or an act of sabotage. Egyptian authorities try to figure out what caused this explosion on a key gas pipeline. And we'll tell you why the International Cricket Council has banned 3 Pakistani players from the game.
Hello there. Well, we've still got torrential rain falling for many of us across Australia. Have a look at the satellite picture because it shows where our old cyclone is. This is Yasi, or the remains of it, gradually making their way towards the west. But they've really intensified this frontal system down in the southeast corner. So heavy downpours we've seen out of this. We have seen flooding in Victoria. Slowly, though, it's going to work its way eastwards as we head through Sunday. That means for Melbourne, it should be a lot drier. However, this area of wet weather across the central belt is still going to be with us, and it's going to stay around as we head through Monday as well. So more heavy downpours to come here all the way through South Australia, and there could be some flooding as well. For New Zealand, well, here it's actually been quite quiet over the past few days. Generally, the wind's coming in from the west, dragging in quite a lot of moisture. So there's a lot of cloud around, a few spots of drizzle, but there hasn't been anything particularly heavy. It's going to change as we head through the day on Monday. The wet weather's pushing its way northward, so heavy downpours there for the South Island, particularly, I think, in the western parts of the country. Up towards the southeastern parts of Asia, and here we've got lots more in the way of wet weather again, particularly heavy for the southern parts of the Philippines and down through Borneo. That's where it's been really wet over the past couple of days. More rain still to come here. Meanwhile, up in China, it's mostly fine and dry.
From local traders to international finance, it's commerce that makes the world go round. For global companies and developing markets, communication is the currency, and information is the most valuable commodity. Counting the cost at this time on Al Jazeera.
As China's economic juggernaut thunders ahead, critics claim this growth exacts a heavy toll. 101 East examines the environmental and human costs of this economic powerhouse. 101 East at this time on Al Jazeera.
Hello again, you're watching Al Jazeera's extended coverage of the ongoing turmoil in Egypt. Here's a reminder of the main developments. There are unconfirmed reports that the banned Muslim Brotherhood will take part in talks with Vice President Omar Suleiman on Sunday morning on a resolution to the crisis. Now, the opposition has previously rejected all dialogue until President Mubarak steps down. Meanwhile, Mubarak's son Gamal and several other top brass from the ruling National Democratic Party have resigned. And the US has reiterated its call for a peaceful transition of power, but there has been mixed signals from Washington about Mubarak's role in the process. So with those reports of talks between the government and elements of the opposition, let's have a look at some of the different strands that make up the pro-democracy movement. Ahmed al-Baradei has set up a coalition of political forces and movements, the National Association for Change. But critics say he came to the protest movement too late. Al-Baradei has the backing of the banned Muslim Brotherhood. That's an Islamist group that's Egyptians most organised in the opposition. Then there's Ayman Noor. He's been heavily involved in the pro-democracy protests, and he heads the El Ghad party tomorrow. That's what it is in English, which is one of Egypt's main opposition groups. Meanwhile, Kifaya, meaning enough, is an intellectual grouping led by George Ishak. Its members want a liberal and democratic Egypt. And then there's the April 6th youth movement, who've been organising the pro-democracy protests using social media websites of Twitter and Facebook. Well, adding to Egypt's problems, there's been an explosion at a gas terminal in the Sinai Peninsula. Jordanian power plants are now running on oil and diesel fuel following the suspension of gas supplies from Egypt. Is it connected to the political crisis? Well, the blast has been blamed on a gas leak, but not all Jordanians are convinced. Nisreen El-Shamaila has more from Amman.
Flames roar hundreds of feet into the sky. An Egyptian gas terminal ablaze. This meant an immediate suspension of gas supplies to neighboring Jordan and Israel. The pipeline in flames supplies gas that is used to generate 80% of Jordan's electricity needs. A real predicament for a resource-poor country. Earlier reports that this was an act of sabotage were then countered by Egyptian officials who claimed the explosion was caused by a gas leak. That's not very convincing here.
I wouldn't be surprised that people who are connected to the Egyptian regime, ordered by the Egyptian regime, were behind this explosion in order to shift the attention from Tahrir Square to the explosion that took place in Sinai.
For now, there is no clear evidence either way, but following weeks of protests demanding economic reforms, pressure mounts on the government to bear the brunt of possible price hikes to avoid further unrest. The suspension of Egyptian gas supplies to Jordan is going to cost the country over $4 million per day. It also comes at a time when the Jordanian government is struggling to ease economic hardships by subsidizing some fuel derivatives. Jordan started importing gas from Egypt 8 years ago. The relationship with President Hosni Mubarak's regime is viewed as a strategic asset. And though officials here have kept quiet, it is believed they privately would rather see Mubarak stay than stand down. Nisreen El-Shamaila, Al Jazeera, Amman.
OK, let's go to Tunisia now, where more than 3 weeks on from the fall of President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, no leading opposition politician nor party has emerged to push for key demands. Many opposition figures say they're not being included in the political process, despite assurances from the interim government. Some even say they feel threatened. Nazanin Moshiri reports from Tunis.
It was a frightening moment for opposition leader Monsef Marzouki as he made his way through the streets of the capital. This footage given to Al Jazeera shows a former exile set upon by what he says are plainclothes